Thank you, Mr. Berry, for graciously agreeing to come and address our Manthan, which Sailesh pointed out is in the third session. Without much ado, I will get into the conversation and I will try to remind you what you as Business Standard's long-standing columnist once upon a time, and also in your various statements in recent years as the Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, you have often talked about the importance of demographics and how it's a key to India's growth trajectory to realize its potential by 2047. Could you please give us a broad overview of how you view the role of demographics of India at present, the challenges, and also the prospects?
Ashok, firstly, thank you for offering me this platform yet again. Let me use the opportunity to say how much I continue to respect the newspaper and how much I particularly look forward to your Raisina Hill columns, because I'm sure the depth of your questioning now will reflect the depth of your both insight and research into what the government I'm pleased to serve gets up to. I hope that this will be as helpful and insightful as I find your columns. So let me just tell you how my thinking on this not only has evolved but currently stands. As your editor had indicated, I was offered charge of NITI Aayog in May of 2022, and we were just recovering from COVID. And I think I'm right in saying that it was in August 2022, from the Red Fort, that the Prime Minister put forward the vision of a Viksit Bharat. Yeah. And also, I think these may not quite be contemporaneous, but he talked about the next 25 years as the Amrit Kal. Yeah. And the reason for, as it were, designating, I think, the next 25 years as the Amrit Kal was demographics, because this is going to be our peak period for additions to the working age population. And the concept of a Viksit Bharat and the concept of that Viksit Bharat being powered by our demographics, I think, are intimately connected. And if you wish, I can go into those connections. But let me also say that, and we've been doing some work on this, that the big growth phase of China was also linked with their very different demographics. Their demographics were distorted by the one-child policies. Fortunately, ours were not. So the first point is that, there ought to be an opportunity for Viksit Bharat in our demographics. The second point, which I do feel it is important to stress before all audiences, and particularly one as distinguished as this, is that Honorable Prime Minister's call is for a modern society. And it is his judgment and everybody's judgment. You can't have a modern society without having a more affluent economy than we have right now. But I just wanted to make the point that the economy is a means to an end. And of course, the Planning Commission, which housed the building I'm in right now, dealt in 5-year, if you like, gulps. Yeah. The idea of looking forward 25 years is unprecedented in India. What I do have to say is the other point that was mentioned by in the introduction is one reason I accepted the job at Royal Dutch Shell is because they were the pioneers in the corporate sector
Absolutely.
of scenarios. Okay, so just to say that there is a fundamental difference, both politically and if you like, technocratically, in thinking ahead 25 years as compared with 5 years. I think I've said enough, and I'll allow you to ask follow-up questions, which perhaps will allow me to go
Mr. Berry, you referred to a very interesting point about China's demographics and India's demographics.
Right.
Could you tell us your assessment of why and how China handled its demographics in a way that we are looking at China a little critically, and whereas India plans to handle its demographics, and in what way those assessment or handling of demographics in India might get better, or what are the challenges that you see India might face in dealing with those demographics challenges?
Okay, you've used the word challenge repeatedly.
Yeah.
I do want to stress opportunity as well.
Opportunity,
Okay, and let me, look, between China and India, we're talking of nearly half of humanity and perhaps larger than this, and it's going to be, we know in India it's very differentiated across states.
Yeah.
I don't have the granularity for China either, but let me, share with you, in a sense, in broad strokes, what has emerged from work that my colleagues have been doing with me and for me at NITI Aayog. So, China, let me get a little technical, and let me draw an analogy a little bit from, as it were, our presence in the rice market or other markets in which we are significant. China then and India now have a working age population which is significant on a global scale. Now, if we were talking of commodities, the economists would have the concept of an optimal tariff, okay? Because if you throw the resource on the global market, you, as it were, change the terms of trade against you. My own sort of broad stroke characterization of what China chose to do was they decided that they would accept the terms of trade loss, i.e. throw 250 million people onto the global market, knowing that that would give, if you like, a deflationary impulse to the global economy and to themselves, on the bet, which they have won, that that way they would gain the technology and the skills, so that that labor force would be able to move up the I have to say move up the productivity ladder, and I'll come back to productivity. And I would have to say that as a strategy, it has worked brilliantly, but it's not made them the most popular country in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
okay?
absolutely.
Right. And now the question arises, A, whether that remains a feasible strategy for India following in China's wake, okay? Will the world allow us to do that? And I think the answer to that is probably no. And so for the question then becomes, for lots of reasons, democracy, savings rates, etc., how should one think of India's strategy following China, but blessed with a similar opportunity? So that's the way I've tried to respond to your China question, but what it implies for India would be, as it were, where we go next, I think.
Well, yes, I think you sort of, you walked into that.
Right.
So what should India do to take advantage of its demographics?
Well, I was fortunate to hear Nilesh, my former colleague, and also Chris. And what was the old line from the Dustin Hoffman movie, The Graduate?
Yeah.
Plastics, right?
Yeah.
So basically in 1968, it was plastics. And I would say the plastics equivalent for India in 2026 is productivity. Okay. So the way in which, I mean, there are lots and lots of ways of, slicing this apple, skinning this cat. But what I find useful as an organizing principle is to think about the need to accelerate growth. Accelerating growth means bringing more people into the active labor force and at the same time trying to raise their average labor productivity. Now there's lots of moving parts behind this, but as a conceptual framework, I think I found that useful. Now, let's just go through each of these. And so there's a distinction between the working age population and the labor force. And the labor force is people who say they are actively looking for work. And what has been idiosyncratic about India is that we've had very different male versus female labor force participation rates. Okay? I was privileged to be at Princeton when Sir Arthur Lewis was associated with it.
Okay.
And he made a point about how the US brought women into the labor force in the 50s and the 60s. So a very important resource to be mobilized, and this differs by state and by sector, is the large number of women who are in the working age cohort, but who are not actively looking for work. I mean, I'm told that basically we're talking about a workforce, a female workforce of 183 million and an out of workforce population of 264 million.
But there's a huge gap.
Right. And so the question is, what constitutes a policy mix? It won't happen all at once, but actually what has been happening in the increase in the female labor force participation rate has been encouraging, as we have seen from the PLFS. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that mobilizing this large reservoir of often skilled women, and often, and addressing, as it were, the barriers, which are social barriers, childcare barriers, that could be a big accelerator. But if Viksit Bharat is to involve improvements in living standards, there's a direct correlation between per capita income, living standards, and labor productivity. And so the challenge is to induct all these people into the labor force while not having them depress labor productivity. Now, more than people realize, India's labor productivity story has not been bad, but it is eclipsed by what China achieved. So if I wanted to point to something that we could imitate China on, it would be to learn how they raise their labor productivity. And the correlation between, at PPP terms, and the ILO comes out with these numbers, that there's almost a 1-for-1 correlation between labor force productivity measured at purchasing power parity and real per capita income. So if we want to get to 18,000 real per capita income by 2047, then what that means is our labor productivity has to go up from roughly where it is right now, at 3,000 or just under 3,000. So that's the magnitude of what we need to aim for. Now, this has many dimensions. It has a skilling dimension. It has a sectoral dimension, agriculture versus. And to me, one of the most interesting discussions, which I attribute to my colleague Arvind Virmani, he has been arguing, and this is somewhat related to the AI discussion we've been having, he has been arguing that the notion, which stems again from Sir Arthur Lewis, that there are many more points of entry for the labor force, for an unskilled labor force in the manufacturing sector, which was the old story. He thinks we need to re-examine that. He feels our services sector may actually provide, if managed correctly, more points of entry for, as it were, this large reservoir. So, and I'm not only talking of the new entrants, I'm saying that the new entrants, the risk is that they would reduce the labor, so productivity for the existing entrants, the existing labor force, largely male, increasing productivity for the new entrants. That is a framing of the challenge that I think lies before us.
And also maybe an increased focus on the services sector. Am I right?
Well, yes, and that's where, in a sense, understanding, and by the way, what is going to happen on the 27th with the new GDP numbers coming out, I think will, and with double deflation, will give us a much better sense of what has been happening. By the way, and productivity in the services sector is not easy. I remember when Marty Feldstein used to come out for Neem Rana, he used to argue that for the US, services of sector productivity was being underestimated. So it's easier in manufacturing and maybe even in agriculture than services. But what I'm saying is that, I think what Honorable Finance Minister, who was going to be here, did say, in her budget speech, it's not either or, it's and we need to look at it, frankly, at the level even of individual states. What's right for Tamil Nadu may not be right for Bihar. The new labor codes provide a lot more flexibility. And we are, as the new book says, talking about 1/6 of humanity and probably a larger part of the global labor force.
I think it's a very interesting construct that you have created here, that, India, if you want to make India a modern society, demographics play a critical role. And in demographics, you have to focus on productivity, but not necessarily the China way. But what that could be for the India, is there a sui generis way of improving productivity in the Indian context? And you also mentioned that Indian productivity story is not that dismal as we often get that sense. How do we raise that productivity level to a point where we can indeed become Vikasit by 2047? Is there any silver bullet? You talked about skilling, but is there something else that we need to do to attack that productivity beast?
Well, firstly, there was a piece in the FT the other day by somebody, I think at Stanford, who, going back to the previous conversation, who basically said, there's a line from Hollywood, nobody knows anything. AI and productivity, nobody knows anything. Okay? We've just had an AI Impact Summit in these halls. And the feedback I got from visitors was what was impressive about the mahal, the gestalt of the meeting, is that on the whole, it was an upbeat rather than a downbeat gathering. So I think there is this sense out there that in the way India gained from globalization, India probably will stand to gain, and I think Chris Wood made the point that the scythe of SCYTEHE of AI is probably more likely to affect advanced country labor markets before they're going to affect us. So I'm just saying that the whole point about a scenarios training at Shell is you have to think in terms of scenarios. You can't think in terms of straight lines. And also that therefore, and I'm not too specific on this, you should be following no regret strategies rather than, and let me just go to the energy area, something I said at a different context, which is that, you know, how we achieve energy sovereignty or energy security without making big bets on particular technologies, be it hydrogen, be it nuclear, be it CCUS, I think that's going to be some of the bigger challenges we're going to have to face face ahead. But now, sorry, I think I've lost your question, which was?
No, the question was, is there any silver bullet, or is there something that is to be done to achieve this productivity opportunity, to use the words?
Well, but I think the point I wanted to come to, I'm sorry if I was rather dilatory on this, is I think some interesting work was actually done. I mean, work has been done by the World Bank. The work we're doing some less sophisticated work, which was part of this fleet of reports we did on the energy transition that came out last week. There's also the IMF's Article 4 report. But I think the important point is that there's going to have to be an increase in our investment rate for a variety of reasons. First, if we're going to have a more rapid growth in the working age population, to supply them with the capital so that there's not capital shallowing, but there's capital deepening, will mean an increase in the investment rate. And by the way, the numbers from that point of view, and I'm talking about domestic investment, we can talk about FDI separately, is that we still remain in something of an afterglow of the global financial crisis. I don't think we quite appreciate how much scarring there was in the private sector with the global financial crisis. So that's one reason why investment rates are going to have to go up. The second reason investment rates are going to have to go up is because we have, under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, taken the bet that we will follow a lower carbon, I won't say, a lower carbon energy trajectory. And these are high capex, low opex technologies. And then I seem to be going back to Arthur Lewis multiple times. But
no problem.
But Sir Arthur also, in a lecture he delivered at the Wilson School, made the point. He said, look, we tended to think, and he was an economic historian before he was a development economist, he said, we all think that it's industrialization that is the investment hog. He said, no, it is urbanization that's the investment hog. And India's urbanization still lies ahead of it. So from a formulation that says our big challenge is manufacturing, I think we really need to think about urbanization, partly because of its governance, partly because of its investment requirement, partly because that's a way of baking in, as it were, greater energy efficiency. And all of this, I would submit, means that we've got to raise our investment rate by 2 or 3 percentage points of GDP. I mean,
Yeah.
Vishwanath Goldar has said we need 40%. I think that's difficult to get to.
Maybe 35?
Yeah, so something like that.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, so what mix of increased domestic savings and foreign savings, and in the turmoil that global financial markets are, do we, is it safe for us to aim for a big widening of the current account deficit? Because that's what it takes analytically to absorb additional investment.
I think, Mr. Berry, I think we have really got into a very engaging discussion, which brings me to two other issues. But before that, I wanted to tell this audience that Mr. Berry has very kindly agreed to take a couple of questions. So please keep your powder dry and think of those questions which you may like.
But only on topic.
Only on topic, absolutely. So let me say, you talked about manufacturing, you talked about services, but you also talked about skilling. Now, is there any specific hurdles that you see and NITI Aayog can come in and play a role as a think tank, the government's premier think tank, in looking at skilling as an area of opportunity?
2 or 3 quick reactions, and this is, if I say anything newsworthy, it may become a headline. I'm quite interested in keeping my job, but nonetheless. Australia has something called a productivity commission, and the thought has gone through my mind that maybe we should rebrand NITI as a productivity commission, and right?
That's an interesting thought.
Right, yeah. And you heard it first here, nobody else has heard it. But the second is, we are already into, as it were, the new pay commission coming in. And economists have known for a long time that our labor market is highly oriented, I wouldn't say distorted, but highly oriented to the lottery of getting a government job. Okay? And so I don't know whether that falls within the pay commission, but reorienting our higher education system so that it's much less focused on government employment, the civil service exams, etc., I think is, something useful that we could do. But I think the second point is that, and this is where we should learn from the US. I mean, we are seeing around the world, and my good friend and colleague Sujit Bhalla has written about this, is that the world seems to have over-invested in tertiary education.
Okay.
And their stories in the United States, in China, conceivably in India as well, about people feeling that they cannot find the jobs for which they were trained. And so while it's a part of, while there are 2 parts of the national education policy, one on lifelong learning and the second on apprenticeship, I think these are elements that are already in the policy framework that we really must double down on. I mean, I lived in the United States for 25 years, and what was available in high school in terms of machine shops, by the way, that was also true at the Doon School, there were community colleges. There was none of this sense of a Mandarin culture that you were training for exams. You were training for life. And I would say in the United States, you were training to be a citizen. So all of these are a part of the NEP, but I think they need to get a prominence that they haven't had up till now.
Okay. You talked about the Productivity Commission kind of a role. Will it be something like the National Productivity Council, which is already there, or will it go beyond that?
Well, you expose an area of my ignorance. Actually, these ideas have been germinating. No, so certainly, it's not as though the idea of productivity was invented by me. Nothing like that. But all I wanted to say was linking the demographics, the demographic dividend, with, as it were, the productivity agenda. That's, as it were, what
I think it's a very, very important issue. No, it is an issue that we don't really accord the necessary importance to. So I think it's important.
And the point being that for this to be a thread or a theme, when there's so much uncertainty about one of the career paths for which all the engineering colleges were set up. IT services, at the end of the day, we need to provide, as it were, India's youth, because the problem is really concentrated on India's youth, women in particular, give them the structures to sniff out for themselves where the opportunities are, and then to skill themselves for the opportunities. And, in this whole, Honorable PM went at the meeting of our governing council and did say that, look, हमारे ITIs मतलब ये internal commits, आप लोग इनको सिखाएंगे क्या? That's the issue. क्या सिखाएंगे?
You talked about investment rate also, and which brings me to this issue about, it is said that historically India has probably looked more at capital side productivity and less at labor side productivity. Today, our capital availability or capital costs are looked at far more closely than the labor costs and the labor issues. Do you see that equation between capital and labor coming in the way of our, taking on and exploiting and taking up the opportunities going forward?
Ashok, I'd like to, link this up to the China model a little bit and think because up till now, it's really been a domestic story. And I think, in closing, because I want to leave time for the questions, it's really the cross-border dimension that we need to focus on. As you know, our Minister Jaishankar has been very diligent at coming up with mobility agreements, although, frankly, quite how receptive the rich world is going to be towards Indian migrants remains to be seen. But I would make 2 or 3 points. First, and this is a point in the economic survey, we have to, as we grow, our imports will need to grow. Those imports will need to be financed. And, as it were, the safest way of financing them is through exports. Now, the question of what exports those would be, whether those would be services exports, who the competition is, how we are competitive in that, is the class of issues that raises. But I would make a second point, which is due really to Martin Wolf. When he spoke at NCAR a couple of years ago, he said, look, if you expect your trade ratio to stay export ratio, but trade ratio, since our trade is approximately what it is, and you want to grow at 7-8%, then your export growth rate, let's say just goods, has to be 8%. if that's taking place at a time when world goods trade is growing at 2%, you are going to want to, as it were, increase your market share. Think about what that's going to take in terms of competitiveness. So therefore, you know, the cross-border element of all of this becomes quite important. Absolutely. The services point earlier was about how to raise the domestic productivity, but this will have an impact on the cross-border dimension.
Absolutely. I mean, before I come to you for a couple of questions, relevant questions, as Mr. Berry rightly pointed out, let me ask you my final question, which is that, you know, 4 things that are right now in front of us on the question of demographics, productivity, labor, etc., which is at one level, we just now had 4 forward-looking progressive labor codes, which is going to be notified very soon. That's one. At the same time, the labor space is faced with the unknown challenges. I'm used against challenges again, but I'm saying opportunities from AI, artificial intelligence. And the third thing is, we are flooded as a country with investment in data centers, which will create jobs, but will also pose other challenges. And finally, there's an ongoing story of the global capability centers where India is poised to become probably a global capital already. Now, these 4 developments, how do you see them from the demographics perspectives of how India can become modern by 2047? Because these are the 4 areas that will probably need to be handled either through policy intervention or through bodies like, august bodies like yours. Please, your comments.
Well, let me, you know, sort of reframe the common thread as I heard it. So the question is there a tension between allocating capital, be it fiscal, public capital or private capital, to the leading edge, as versus the trailing edge, okay? And look, our abundant resource is people, labor.
Absolutely.
Okay? And therefore, my metric for all of this is really, and I'm repeating myself, so I won't belabor it, is in the journey to Viksit Bharat, do we have a structure where people, where individuals are investing sufficiently in themselves and getting the guidance so that, because and our unemployment rates are not the issue, so that they are self-directing to where the new areas are. Now, you know, people have won Nobel Prizes for search models of the labor market, okay? And, you know, I don't have concrete proposals of how to get our labor markets to operate better, but, you know, I think that would be an area to apply our mind to, and to think of 2 things. One is local labor markets, but second, to make sure, with reservations, this, that, and the other, that we retain the integrity of a single market. GST was obviously extremely important for that. You know, the seasonal migration is a very important part of that. That, in many ways, is our biggest asset, and we must be sure that our politics doesn't end up, as it were, rupturing that, to use the term. Mark,
sure. Does AI worry you from this perspective?
I see it more as an opportunity.
Opportunity, right. Okay. Let me come to the question. Please go ahead. Mic there, please. Please identify yourself and...
Hi, good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Binay Gupta. I run a strategic advisory firm, Geosynthesis. My question for Mr. Berry is, do you think industrial policy should/will be the primary driver of India's economic growth in the coming years? Or should the government create policy frameworks and let the private sector be the steer? Thank you.
It's my boss at Shell used to say it's not either or and. I think it's both. And for the specific reason, look, I mean, we can see the last 20 years as the world adjusting to the China shock, okay? So there were a certain set of expectations when the US finally allowed China into the WTO. And so 2 points. We know how that movie ended, and we don't want to be stigmatized like China. So, everybody is having to think about, and indeed what President Trump is up to in rejecting MFN, etc., is, and Arvind Subramaniam had once talked about a WTO round. So we don't actually have a rules-based framework for dealing with the China shock. And it is in that context that I think some kind of trade defense measures are needed. Do I believe? So I think the other learning from China, which is contrary to my training as a liberal economist, is that yes, comparative advantage can be earned by making a big investment and then exploiting the learning by doing. And that's really what China did. But we should appreciate that all of that came out of a policy framework which elevated domestic savings so that savings were nominally costless. Of course, they paid the price in lower consumption than ourselves. So I would say that, again, it can't be binary, and it possibly needs to be decided even state by state.
This question from here, please.
So it was wonderful listening to you again. We have listened to you in the PhD chamber many times. So in your entire speech today, the word agriculture came up only twice. And I say this because, sir, you focused on women and the fact that women need skill development. I have been involved in rural development in 15 villages. So today, 80% of the labor in the fields is women. And in the schools in the rural area, women are only 30% of the students. They do not go to the KVKs because the KVKs are far away. Second,
yeah, please ask your question, please.
The question, sir, is what is the focus of NITI Aayog in productivity development in the rural area?
Okay.
That's right.
2 or 3 points. Mea culpa, I totally agree. Second, I think agriculture is both a, if you like, mollycoddle sector, but ought to be is a huge opportunity for us. But all countries, the United States, Europe, make the politics of agricultural change is complicated. But you're very right that much of the action on the gender front has to be in agriculture. I would make a third point, though, and then make way for the next speaker. And the third point comes from work that has been done by Harvard by a good friend, Robert Lawrence, who has been talking about, as it were, the fact that of premature deindustrialization in the labor markets, that in all countries, essentially the share of employment in manufacturing has been going down over time. That's because manufacturing is productive, and the income elasticity of demand for manufactured goods is low as compared with services. The important point for India is that agricultural incomes stimulated by rising productivity are a huge domestic source of manufacturing demand. And so for many reasons, I totally agree with you that, that a sectoral take on the productivity puzzle must include agriculture. But I believe Dr. Chand is a speaker in this Manthan, and I would not wish to tread on his territory.
Thank you very much. I think just to add to Mr. Berry, we do have a session with the Agriculture Minister later in the day, and we have another session with Mr. Chand, Mr. Ashok Gulati. These are all agriculture experts, so you will have your fair share. Thank you, Mr. Berry, for being very, very gracious, very accommodating, and we covered a wide range of issues. I don't want to cover it up and say what all we discussed, but it was a conversation par excellence. And if all of you agree with me, please give him a very good. Thank you very much.